And Robert, we're talking here about organizations, having processes and actions in place to either prevent or respond to it. What else can we do that may not have been considered? And what I'm thinking about here is a general view that I've seen over the past few years is how much more transparent governments are when you experience a nation state attack. Should we consider naming and shaming of as much as we can with, cyber criminal groups? Any thoughts around that?
Well, I think that has been a good development, that governments have been a bit more open about saying where they think attacks come from. But in the end, for the average business, it's almost irrelevant, as I think John was saying earlier, where the attack's actually coming from and how you attribute it. I mean, it's interesting and valuable if you're in that business. Mm-hmm. But actually, for somebody trying to defend an organization, whether it's Chinese or Russian, whether it's criminals, nation state, or somewhere in between, doesn't much matter. And actually, the prevention you need to do is pretty much the same.
Okay. But is there an opportunity, though, that that we as organizations can get better at sharing information without the worry of regulators coming knocking on our door?
Yes, and it's quite interesting if you look at the President Biden's executive order on cyber security, which he's just put out, a very large document, a lot of detail. Interesting for a couple of reasons. One is it puts a lot of the basics in there, sort of mandates things which we've all been talking about for years, like multi-factor authentication. Yeah. Who would have thought, you need to do that now?
Yes.
But it's great to see. And I think you will see a lot more of that here as well. And this UK and EU governments have been very timid about regulating.
Yes.
And telling companies, you must do this.
Yeah.
For understandable reasons, and of course there are downsides to regulation. We all know that. But we've reached a point, I think, particularly with ransomware, where we're not really going to make a difference unless people start getting the basics right.
Yeah.
Because as John said, you can prevent these actually.
Yes.
And there are plenty of companies out there. You can't prevent being targeted, but there are plenty of companies out there who do not suffer these attacks.
Yes.
And when they do, they can contain them and recover quickly, as Steve said. So it is possible. And we just need to incentivize companies to do that.
And is this also, just on that particular point, should an attempt or our attempt be at a point where you're frustrating the criminal groups enough to push them elsewhere? Because ultimately they've got a certain amount of resources, a certain amount of time. It's, as you said before, it is a business and there's a profit to be made.
Well, I think that's already happening, and you see the trend. You were just talking about operational technology. Financial services for 15 years has been number one target for obvious reasons, where all the money is. But actually, the last couple of years, you've seen sophisticated ransomware targeted at manufacturing, at automotive sector, because they know they can't afford the business interruption and they'll pay.
Yes.
So it's the nice thing about cybercrime is it's quite predictable, actually. If something gets hardened, there are plenty of other low-hanging fruit and soft targets to go for.
Yeah.
They don't just give up, but their business model is high return, low risk, low cost.
Yeah.
They're not going to put a lot of effort into something that is difficult to do when they can get easy pickings from the rest of the economy.
Yeah.
And that'll be true for countries as well. I mean, we are seeing some displacement from countries that are better protected to other countries. So absolutely, you're right.
So Steve, as a cyber criminal, you've got...
I'm not a cyber criminal, by the way, just to be clear.
You've got anonymity. You've got luckily the lack of fluidity across jurisdictions around the world. You've got all the sort of the technical tools and capabilities to launch your attack, and you've got a massive payday potentially if you're lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's a worrying situation. But let me come on to something that I think we've talked about ransomware. We've talked about very much about the supply chain. Are there other techniques that are being employed by these cyber criminal groups that it could be circumventing vetting procedures, for example, and placing it inside, the things like this that we should not, we should keep the light shining on the number of these areas. And anything in particular you think that, that we need to focus on?
Well, you'll remember, Nick, not so long ago, us at the ISF coming out with a whole range of different papers and advice and guidance around what we call human-centered security.
That's right.
Understanding the psychology of it, being very much more aware of vulnerabilities that,
Yeah.
that perhaps people are open to,
Yeah.
particularly when they're working from home. And that was one of the things that was driving it, because it's all very well to be able to perhaps implement some security for your employees when they're in a building that you understand, you control, and so on. But when they're working from home, life becomes very, very much more challenging.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly one of the ways that we would say you can start to go forward there, because it isn't just about technology. Technology does have a very strong role to play, clearly, but it is about the people element too.
Yes.
And I think that, Robert's point there about there's plenty for the cyber criminal to go after.
Yeah.
You really do want to make yourself look as unattractive as possible.
Yeah.
You really do. Because there are plenty of people out there that are more attractive. And that, some people listening to this may think that's a very selfish approach, but actually, if I'm responsible for a business and to my shareholders, whilst I'm very sorry if John gets attacked, I'm grateful that it wasn't me. So there's all of these different things that come into play as well.
And John, that's a really important point, because organizations, they will love to announce, well, BP, maybe oil companies, maybe a big find. There may be companies that announce a big contract with a defense contractor. That's information that can attract a level of unwanted attention, right? Should we, is that something we can manage with the business? How do we go about that?
Well, look, like everything in life, it's a balancing act. And any form of risk, whether it's cyber risk or any other risk, you're aiming for a balance, aren't you? And so, you've got to try and achieve a balance between not setting yourself up as a big target versus allowing the business to sell effectively, to play its role in the world. But what do I mean by not setting yourself up as a big target? So there's a difference between saying, yes, we're an oil and gas major, we've made a new big oil and gas reserves find, and letting slip that your future well logging oil reserves analysis strategy, rather than using your powerful supercomputers in-house, is to go and buy the dollar from Google.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference I'm trying to draw here? I mean, clearly there's certain types of information which opens the door or raises the eyebrow for the cyber criminal. And actually, just again, I go back to something I said earlier, and it's been sort of reinforced by both of you, which is that if you understand the way these cyber criminals think, then you'll make better judgments about what you should say in public as a business, and therefore how you should manage your profile. That's I think that's a key role for the CISO to play. So again, going back to what we've been saying about the CISO being able to speak with the business, being an enabler, the CISO needs to be able to reason about these very non-technical issues, these forefront business issues, to give the right sort of advice.
Yeah, okay. And Robert, just taking a look at it from the government's perspective here, and you mentioned before about the executive order. A number of questions that have come in here around the role of governments and what they can do. And I think there's a general sort of theme emerging around, is there, insight and intelligence that government groups like GCHQ would have that could share more freely with organizations?
Well, I think the whole purpose of the National Cybersecurity Centre was to try to find a space where that could happen. So it's unclassified mostly, and you've got GCHQ people sitting alongside industry people, and there's much further to go and in information sharing. But I think it's worth saying that most of the data is actually in the private sector.
Yes.
So most of this is an open source threat, really, and the actors are out there on the internet.
Right.
So yes, government has some insights into specific nation state activity. It has insight into some crime groups. It has some data that other people don't have, but actually there is no holy grail out there. This is up to the whole economy to sort. And I think, government's role is to provide expertise and some secretly, lawfully acquired data, but actually it's for the rest of us to do cybersecurity.
Yes.
There isn't a magic solution.
Yeah.
In any country, I think, even the most sophisticated.
Okay. So Steve, I guess it's down to, and I know ISF do a lot of this, it's fostering a community, if you like, where it's easy to share information and to get better at, notifying colleagues and peers in industry about types of information or types of attacks they've experienced.
I think that's right, Nick. And I think that, to Robert's point, it isn't restricted to either government or private sector. It's about that collaboration.
Yes.
So
yeah.
there's a lot of very good stuff, for instance, that Interpol put out around what's happening from a crime standpoint, and that's very helpful for some of the things we've been talking about. Similarly, governments are involved in that as well. So it's about putting all of it into the melting pot. And yes, from an ISF standpoint, that is something that we do try to do, to facilitate that kind of sharing of information. And there are other organizations out there that are doing that as well. But I think it has to be, very much more of a global initiative.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be able to sort it out if you're just focused in your own little backyard.
Yeah.
Because that isn't the nature of the problem.
Yeah, yeah. And John, I guess, on that point, to be able to facilitate that, legal boundaries have got to be, lowered, if you like, to allow CISOs and security functions to know that it's okay for them to be able to share information.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think our legal colleagues, their attitudes are changing, actually partly because of the rampant sort of pandemic of ransomware going on. So, they are seeing that you're being targeted, being impacted by ransomware isn't necessarily an indication of negligence, prima facie. It isn't necessarily a route to, a regulatory fine. It isn't necessarily, a huge hit reputationally for that business. But it is absolutely damaging to the business, and therefore anything that can be done by sharing with other companies to avoid being damaged in the first place is important. So actually speaking, and like Robert, I've experienced a number of more recent ransomware incidents, speaking with legal advisors, both legal staff in-house and also external advisors with huge experience of these situations, the attitudes that say, no, you mustn't tell anyone. Right. No, you mustn't share with other businesses. Yeah. No, we might be accused of anti-competitive practices if we share with a part of the market, which, by the way, was a real issue a few years ago for the oil and gas sector, for example. The legal eagles wouldn't allow us CISOs to share because it was anti-competitive. That is falling away now, and that is nothing but a good thing.
Yeah.